Well, lucky me. I'm off to the doctor after the show again. Luckily, I have a great relationship with her, whom I have been going to for many years. Now, what I don't like is at the end of our 15-minute catch-up, I have to pay nearly $90. Not as bad as the after hours I went to a couple of months ago on a Sunday that was a whopping $170, but then, it was a Sunday. However, there can be huge differences in the cost of a GP appointment across the country and even across the street, it seems. A typical GP appointment, say, at Ponsonby Medical Centre, which is in an upmarket in the inner centre of Auckland, costs about $90, which is what I pay. Across the road in the same affluent area, an appointment at an enrolled patient at All Family Medical Centre is $29.50. In Remuera, another well-to-do suburb, 2 GP clinics a block from each other charge about $70 for an appointment. Many GPs appointments through local doctors, which is a network of about 34 clinics, will cost less than $20. So what gives? Are we paying for the postcode or the care? Well, it's great to have him back on the show. He's almost like our resident doctor, isn't he? It's Dr Bryan Betty. Hello, Brian.
Hi, Leah. Good to be here.
Good to have you back again. Okay, why do some GP visits cost more than others, Brian?
Yeah, look, it's a very good question, one we get asked all the time, and it's complex. It's like explaining quantum theory, I suppose.
Oh dear.
It's very, very complex. So in its simplest form, GPs basically get their money off the government in what's called capitation. The government gives a subsidy for the service they provide.
Yep.
But that subsidy doesn't cover the cost of running a practice. So the patient does have to pay what we call a copay or a part payment to go to the doctors. Now, the subsidy from the government is very, very dependent on the patient. So it varies. So, for instance, you'll get a lot less off the government for a 25-year-old male than you will get off the government for a 65-year-old female, for instance. So it's very dependent on age and gender. So it's a very, very complex formula. Mm-hmm. So essentially your government funding is based on your practice mix. That is the patients who are coming to see you. So again, that varies from practice to practice as to what the government is funding you. But the other thing that comes into play is different practices obviously have different costs. I mean, there's rental, you have to pay for doctors, nurses, administrative staff, IT. So it's quite a high-cost business. So the gap is really, to break even, the difference between what the government subsidises and what you actually need to keep the practice open and running. Yeah.
Isn't that is so complicated, Brian? Like as you were saying, so I looked at this and say for each 25 to 44-year-old female enrolled, a clinic gets about $132 a year. The funding is $85 for males in the same age range. Children under 4 get about over $500 because a clinic can't charge. And for an enrolled male patient over 65, I get emotional, the clinic gets about $270 in annual funding. So would a clinic handpick who it takes if they get different funding?
Look, no, that doesn't really happen. I suppose, we hear this a lot, but that's not really the case. Because the other thing that comes into play is if you've got a community services card, the government gives you more money and you cap the fee for going to the doctor at about $19.50, $20. So there are these other elements that come into play. Again, if you're a very low-cost access practice, which you've actually described a couple there, the maximum they're allowed to charge is $20 because they get extra money off the government. But unfortunately for those practices, often the extra money they get off the government doesn't compensate for the increase in complexity or the complexity of patients they're actually seeing. I'm in that situation in East Porora with our practice, where we're about 90% high needs, mainly Māori, Pacific and refugee. We're very low-cost access, so the most a patient will pay to come and see us is $19. However, about 50% of our patients can't afford even that, so we have to write that off. So we're very, very dependent on the underlying government funding, and it certainly does not compensate for the service we have to deliver. So, look, a really, really diffuse picture across New Zealand with what I'd have to say, Leah, and this is the problem, a funding capitation system. The capitation system itself is okay, but it was designed 20 years ago, and it's very, very out of date in terms of the demands or the needs of patients across New Zealand. So it's one of the things we've been talking to the government with. Yeah.
Right. Do you want to see the funding lifted? Obviously.
Well, the funding what we call re-weighted or re-looked at to give a fair reflection of what goes on. Because, you're right. For a lot of patients now, the copay, and we're aware of this, is getting very high.
Oh, my gosh,
$90 you just mentioned. The average, I think, across New Zealand is $60 to $65. Yeah. And that does put some people off going to see the doctor, and that's a really bad position to be in. Yeah.
I mean, when I started seeing my doctor, and like I said, I'm lucky to have her because they stopped taking new patients at their centre years ago. But I think she was in the high 50s, I think, when I started seeing her, and now I'm up to 85 or 88 or whatever it is. It's just, it's crazy.
Yeah. The other thing to mention on the copay, practices can't just charge what they want. It's regulated by the government. They allow an increase per year, and they dictate what that increase is going to be. So this year it was 7%, I think it was, on the copay because they gave a smaller increase on the capitation. So, the government very much regulates how much.
Brian, I don't know if I've asked you this before, but you mentioned where your practice is. Where are you? Porirua?
In Porirua, in Cannons Creek, East Porirua. Yeah.
And you see predominantly you've got Pacifica Māori clients, quite a few patients. Why in all statistics, and we hear it all the time in mainstream media and in all stories that that Māori and Pacifica are overrepresented when it comes to sicknesses. Why is that?
Yeah, look, it's a complex question, but it's a very, very real situation we have in New Zealand. So we know that Māori and Pacific tend to be overrepresented in areas of high needs. So that's the first thing. So if you're in a poorer area, we know from all the statistics you have poorer health outcomes, increased smoking, obesity, diabetes. At our practice, diabetes rate at our practice is 4 times the national average. So all those conditions tend to be loaded. However, if you take away deprivation, if you take away poverty, if you take away a whole lot of other things, all the studies show there is still a difference for Māori and Pacific in terms of health outcome.
Hey, now that's interesting. Why is that then?
Yeah. Look, it's not.
You mean genetically different?
Well, it may not be that. It's not fully understood. But when you what we call level out everything else, there is still a difference that occurs. We know for things like, for instance, for gout, we know that genetically gout tends to affect Māori and Pacific 4 times the rate of European. That is genetically driven. Some of these other things may be genetically driven. They may not be. But again, all the studies show that if you take out everything else, there is a difference, which is why this is a very live discussion in New Zealand about funding for health services.
It is.
There is a greater need in certain populations, and that's indisputable. It's there up front.
It's interesting.
In front of us in all the studies.
So that's interesting that you say if you even took out, your smoking and obesity, you bring it on yourself, because you chose to smoke and normally you chose to overeat. But even if you had took all that away, you were saying that even Māori and Pacifica can still be overrepresented in other high needs areas.
In terms of health outcome. Absolutely.
Health outcomes.